Mark, we saw a real defiance about Saracens on the weekend, but how debilitating has the last week been for you, for the club?
No, it's been unique and uniquely challenging, I would say. I think all of the squad and all of the staff, certainly up at the training ground, were incredibly shocked on Monday, Tuesday when the news filtered through. But as you say, the thing that made us proud, at least in the short term, was just how well everybody rallied together for the rest of that week, and the unity that we showed. Down at Kingsholm on Saturday said something about the spirit that exists within this organisation.
As tough as you've found it as a coach, as a DOR, this last week?
Of course, because it's not something anybody expects to happen, and we understand there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. The club are at the moment considering what happens next and what happens by way of appeal and that kind of thing. But up at the training ground, our job is to get on with the rugby. As strange as that might seem to people, our job is to get on with the rugby, and my job, along with others, is to try to get the best out of this group, and that's what we're going to try to continue to do.
And on that basis, what, in your mind, has the impact been on the players?
It's difficult to tell how it affects people individually, because there are obviously internal questions to be answered eventually about people's futures and that kind of thing, because at the moment we're under a 35-point deduction and the threat of relegation, and the implications that potentially has for a lot of people who work at the club. So there are those things which need to be resolved in due course, depending on the club's decision as to whether to appeal or not. So I think it's hard to tell sometimes how everybody feels, but what we've always had up here is a real togetherness and a real tightness and a real care for each other and a real support for each other, and I think that's one thing that I've noticed certainly in the last week or so, is that people looking out for each other, and a lot of people who weren't involved in the matchday squad travelled down to Kingsholm on Saturday to support their teammates and to be there, and all that's important.
So from what you've said there, are you concerned in some capacity that some people at Saracens, staff across the club, might actually end up losing their jobs over this potentially?
We don't know. We don't know, because it's so early after the decision's been made. Like I said, the first decision is for the club to make is whether they appeal the verdict of the tribunal, and thereafter you've got to plan for all the different possible scenarios after that, and that's something which is going to take some time, of course. But the sooner we get on with that, the better. The sooner the case is resolved one way or another, the better. And it feels at times such a shame, because we feel that or certainly I feel anyway, that we run a good model for English rugby. There's a lot of homegrown talent which has been developed through this club over a long period of time. A club who genuinely care about their players, not just while they're here, but when they leave here. And in my view, and I've been here for a while, that is genuine. So all of these emotions running through your head.
Given what we know, and at the moment we only have the facts of the finding of the three-man panel, which which dictates that we have to assume that Saracens have been found guilty of the breach. As it stands, the club has not requested a review. I have to ask you this question: how much, if at all, are you responsible for the breach?
I suppose I understand, of course, why you would ask me that question. It's probably the one question that I'm not going to be able to give you a satisfactory answer to right now, and the reason for that is because of a potential pending appeal, and you know, I think it's probably inadvisable for me to give you that kind of answer, even though I understand completely why you would ask the question.
Is there an element of feeling let down by anyone else at the club, the hierarchy at the club, if the errors were made on their part rather than yours? And indeed, does that feeling, if it exists, does it exist amongst the playing group too?
It's again, like I said to you at the beginning of the interview, it's hard to know how every individual is feeling. I'm sure there's a range of emotions for different people, and probably different emotions on different days for people. And one of the primary tasks for me is to try to get as much unity as we possibly can, and try to sustain that unity over the course of the season. A good start with that last week, but you know, it's maybe easy to have that kind of mentality for a week, but sustaining it for longer is going to be the challenge. But there's a lot of good people in this organisation. I can't speak more highly of the playing group, more highly of the staff, and most of the staff that we've got here, most of the playing group that we've got here have been here for forever. You know, so we're not just, we're colleagues, we're friends, and we know each other's families well, and I do think that the chances of us staying unified are greater because of that.
How do you reflect on the reaction to Saracens' defiant response? Because it has been defiant. The statement made by the club was defiant. There's a lot of emotion out there. There's a lot of people that are very opinionated about it. Do you understand that reaction?
I think people are entitled to their opinions. Of course they are, and when they read and they hear that the club have been found guilty of what they've been found guilty of, you can understand how they feel. Things are never as black and white as they are, and you know, I don't think too many people know too much about all of the facts of the case as well, which but I'm sure come out in due course. Yeah.
One of the key values of this club is humility, Mark. I think anybody who knows you knows that you're a humble man. Do you think the club's response has been humble?
I think the club genuinely believe that they were doing the right things for the players. Like I said at the beginning, the two of the things that I'm proud of being part of this club is one, the homegrown talent side of it, putting that front and centre of the development of the club over the last 10 years. And secondly, the genuine care that exists for the players who are here, not just for their time here, but what happens next. And I think that there's a lot of that which the club do brilliantly well, and it's two of the things I'm so proud of being here. And I think the club, when you asked about a defiant response, I do think that the club felt that they were doing the right things.
Rob Baxter, in some of his comments, suggested that no club really should be looking for ways around the salary cap, for ways to find loopholes, for anything around the edges that might be susceptible to exposure. Do you understand his comments, and what's your reaction to that idea that essentially, regardless of the actual minutiae of what may or may not have happened, that it's essentially against the spirit of the salary cap regulations, which we all know Saracens signed up to as one of the member clubs of Premiership Rugby. Is it against the spirit to be trying to find the edges, find the holes?
You asked me first, is Rob entitled to his opinion? Of course he is. The second part of the question is again one of those difficult ones for me to answer, given that the club are considering appealing the decision, and again it's difficult for me to add to what we've already said in that particular case.
Okay, so one of the things that is mentioned in your statement is that administrative errors relating to the non-disclosure of some transactions were made. Now, you can argue the language, but to me that sounds a little bit like the document wasn't formatted properly or there was some minor indiscretion, but the margin of the fine and the punishment, 35-point deduction, £5.3 million fine, those are big penalties, which is suggestive of a big transgression. So is that statement maybe a little bit misleading?
I think that when the detail of the case comes out, I think it will be more understandable. I think that particular part of the statement relates to something which the club pleaded guilty to, and it will become very obvious why that was made when the full details come out.
Remains to be seen whether the full details will come out, by the way, because Premiership Rugby and the regulations, as I understand it, don't actually allow for that to happen, so we might not ever see it. However, can you explain why the review hasn't been lodged yet, the request for that review?
I think, as far as I know, Monday, what day is today? Tuesday. 6 days' time is when it has to be done by, and of course these things take a measured response. You need to take time to go through the judgment in its totality. You need to get plenty of advice. It's way above my pay grade, to be honest, and my job at the moment is to get on with the rugby and, like I said to you, concentrate on getting the best out of this group, and others in the organisation will make that decision, not me.
I fully understand what you've just said. It seems pretty extraordinary, though, that potentially you could be launching a defence of your position on the grounds that what you did or didn't do wasn't inside the framework of a document, a salary regulations document that Saracens helped draw up. Wouldn't you be arguing almost against your own documentation?
Again, you probably need to ask that question to someone in the organisation who is above my pay grade.
Mark, is it possible that if this decision is upheld, that Nigel Ray, the owner of this club, walks away from Saracens?
I very much hope not. I think Nigel Ray is a great man. He's given a lot to rugby and a lot to this club, a lot to the community over a very, very long period of time. So I very much hope not.
The prospect of that happening is barely worth thinking about from a Saracens perspective, isn't it? Given what you've just said, how damaging might that prospect be?
I haven't really thought about that, to be honest.
Does the ruling, in your mind, tarnish any of your achievements, particularly your European titles, given that we're in European week and you're about to embark on the defence of your crown?
I think in lots of people's eyes, it will. Having been at the coalfield here for the last 10 years and seen the hard work of our playing group, the hard work of our staff, the growth of our playing group from 14-year-olds through to British Lions and that kind of thing. For us, and hopefully at least someone like you will realise, I don't think we've ever shouted from the treetops about what we've won and that kind of thing. It's been more about what we've built and the relationships that exist here. You know, the relationships that I have with our coaches, our staff, our playing group, it's something that I cherish. And I guess the big challenge for us now is to see how we respond to this. Can those relationships, which we've worked so hard on over the last 10 years, be as strong in 2 years' time or 3 years' time? And that'll be a real test for us.
Does it sadden you that you embark on week one of the Champions Cup in this situation with everybody talking about the salary cap breach as opposed to the on-field matters, the importance of your defence?
Yeah, because it was going to be a challenging week anyway, to be honest, because my mind was racing as to what we were going to do with our England players, because they've been away from the club for 5 months. They're not robots. We were going to weigh up whether it was they were in the right place physically, emotionally to be able to contribute to these first 2 games. And yeah, now the conversation has to be a little bit different, but the scheduling of the first round of Europe was problematic in any event, and obviously this has put another factor into the equation.
Have you decided what to do? Does the Premiership now have to be your number one priority? Because you mentioned on the weekend that you might have to just accept that worst case scenario is the one that you have to plan for, and clawing back those points, Premiership survival, and who knows, potentially even qualifying for the Champions Cup. But Europe, is that going to take a back seat? It's not a word that you would use, I'm quite sure, but is it going to have to be a second priority this season?
Just one of the things I would say about that is just what I saw on the weekend from this other group, the non-international group, who have just been so magic over the last 8 weeks, and for us to be sitting on 13 points after 4 games with so many players missing, not just the World Cup players, but the Alex Goods, the Brad Parrots, the Max Whalens. I'm so proud of how the staff and the players have got on with it, and a lot of them have shown that they're ready to play European rugby, and we just need to decide who's ready to attack this competition the most physically and emotionally, and we'll make those decisions over the next few days.
You can make up to 5 changes, can't you, ahead of Europe for your squad? Are you going to do that? Have you done that? And can you tell us who those players might be if you are?
No, we haven't made those changes yet, and I think this year in Europe it's a little bit different. There are some swaps. You can take people out and then put them back in again, as I understand it, unless I've got the regulations wrong. But for now, no, we haven't made any changes.
Do you have any kind of idea of a timescale as to when you might make the call as to how much you throw into Europe? I don't mean physically, because that will always be presumably 100% from each of the players, but in terms of your player resources, when do you think you'll be in a position to know where you're targeting?
One of the complicating factors in all of this is how many games players are allowed to play in a season. And if we use Billy as an example, Billy played 4 warm-up games and 5 games at the World Cup, and there's 9 of his 30 that he's played already. If you think he's going to play in the Six Nations, there's 14. It leaves Billy with 16 games he's allowed to play in the season. So we just need to, on a case-by-case basis, work out where they're going to be most useful to the team, I guess, and make sure that we look after them at the same time. That's the big thing at the moment, really, is those players. I'm not so sure they're in the right place to come back and have to go to Paris for a game, having been away for 5 months.
Racing away under normal circumstances would be a tremendous highlight for this club. Are you looking at it rather as a bit of an obstacle you'd rather not have this weekend?
Obstacles are good. Obstacles are, I think, what we definitely do have in this organisation is players and staff who see opportunities and upsides in most things, and it's difficult to do that in this particular situation right now, but that's our job. Our job is we're going to expose undoubtedly some younger players to European rugby over the course of this season. That's going to accelerate their development. We've had to do that in the Premiership already, and we've seen the benefits from Manu and Roddy and also Ralph Adams-Hale before his terrible injury at the weekend. So all of these things have upsides. I think if you talk to our World Cup players, and if they're absolutely honest with you, the prospect of slogging it out over the next 6 months in Six Nations, Europe and Premiership, it's tough for players. It's tough to do after a very demanding World Cup. So we get an opportunity to look after them properly, because I don't know if they're always looked after properly, and they get short pre-seasons and that kind of thing. So, you know, my job, other people in the club above me need to make some bigger decisions about whether we appeal, how we're going to deal with all the different situations which could arise from what we're going through. My job is to try to get the best out of the team that we've got here, try to accelerate the development of some young players, try to look after our international players, but make sure they're enthusiastic and excited when they come to play for their club, and make this club this group as united as we possibly can.
It's likely, isn't it, that if this points deduction remains, you might have to win the Champions Cup to qualify it for next season. Has that been a discussion point at all?
Funnily enough, no, it hasn't been. You know, so yeah. Last week we just talked about showing some unity and going to Kingston and giving of our best, and we did a good job down there. We know there's bigger challenges ahead, more challenges ahead. It's easy to have a 1 week response. We know there's questions to be answered to the outside world as well. There's decisions for the club to make on what we do next and whether we appeal. But hopefully these things can be brought to a close quickly, so that we can all get on with playing rugby.